Erik, Chapter 10. I sat in my shadowy seat, far at the back of my box 5 in an empty auditorium, and looked back over my notebook. The auditioning singers had so far been good, but none of them had been exceptional. I planned to let Lefebvre and his artistic staff make the choices of which singers to hire, but I felt that I should sit in on the audition process in case they showed signs of overlooking someone whose voice appealed to me. I knew that a note from myself to Lefebvre might change the trajectory of someone's career, catapulting them onto the stage of the Paris Opera. I wasn't doing it for altruistic reasons, but rather financial ones. I knew that with the right star, the opera could generate even more profit than it already did, and I reasoned that I might thus be able to increase the salary I demanded. I was in the middle of calculating a complex formula to determine the amount of extra money I would ask for, trying to work out a way to tie the number to the extra ticket sales generated by the new artist, when my attention was captured by a tentative voice from the center of the stage. I raised my opera glasses and watched as a young woman of about 18 stood at center stage and introduced herself.
Bonjour, monsieur. My name is Christine Daae, and for my audition today, I would like to sing Ach, ich fühl's from Die Zauberflöte.
She took a deep breath and steadied herself while the pianist played 2 opening chords. Then she launched into the aria from Mozart's opera. I watched, entranced, as she sang the aria. Her voice actually wasn't all that good. Several of her notes wavered in pitch, and her melismas did not clearly define each note. And she did not have the air of melancholy that should go with this song of lost love. No, what held my attention was not her music, but a memory. Her name had recalled to me the kind man who allayed my fears over my voice changing while I was caged at the traveling fair. And this young lady had the same dark curls as the small child who had accompanied him that day. Was it possible this was the same person? She finished her aria, and the judges below me in the stalls conferred, hemming and hawing about what they had heard. She stood in the center of the stage, tall and straight, but twisting her fingers together anxiously. Lefebvre addressed her. Mademoiselle, we have an opening for you. You've listed on your letter of introduction here that you studied ballet for 5 years. You may join our secondary corps of dancers if you wish. I knew that being in the secondary corps was no great achievement. Such dancers were only used when the scene called for a large host of dancers, and they were kept far to the back behind the regular dancers. A discerning eye could generally spot many secondary dancers whose movements were not quite synchronized with everyone else's. These dancers were also paid accordingly, earning mere fractions of a % of the nightly profits. I watched Christine's face fall as she realized what she was being offered fell far short of what she'd dreamed. I felt an unexpected burst of sympathy for her. I, too, had experienced many disappointments in my 23 years. I heard her accept the offer with obvious false cheerfulness, and resolved to instruct Madame Giry to give the girl as much extra support as she required. Perhaps she would be one of the few to make it into the corps of primary dancers, although the rigorous physical demands of that role made such a promotion a mixed blessing. A few months passed. Christine settled into her new role within the company. I was busy writing a new symphony, but something kept nagging at my conscience. I finally put down my pen one evening and dropped my head into my hands at my desk, determined to get to the bottom of what was bothering me. I sat staring into space, and finally I was able to name what was nagging at me. Christine's father had given me the key to what I wanted. He had known somehow that the impending change in my voice was bothering me, and had reassured me and encouraged me to keep working at it until I developed the sound I wanted in my new register. Without his kind words, I might never have discovered the world of music in which I was now immersed. I decided that I ought to do the same for his daughter. She wanted to sing in the opera chorus. I would do her one better than that for her father's sake. I would give her the voice of a star. The question that occupied me next was how I would approach her and help her work on her singing. As a dancer, she had no dressing room of her own, no space in which she could experiment with and tune her voice. I decided to enlist Madame Giry's help. I selected a dressing room that wasn't assigned to anyone, one that was connected to my secret passageway by one of the mirror doors. I asked Madame Giry to bring Christine to this room after the performance. I prepared the room carefully. I removed the dust covers from the few pieces of furniture. The room must not have been needed for many months, for it took 3 passes over all the surfaces in the room with the duster before I was satisfied that they were adequately free of dust. On the dressing table, I left a single red rose in a vase. I tied a black ribbon around the vase, admiring the contrast between the shining crystal and the dark ribbon. I heard performers outside returning noisily to their dressing rooms after the final bows, and retreated back through the mirror door to wait. The main door opened soon after, and Madame Giry entered, tugging a wide-eyed Christine behind her. The evening's show had involved the secondary dancers, so I knew she would be tired. She dropped onto the stool at the dressing table and began to remove the ballet slippers that constricted her feet. Madame Giry turned and saw herself out, but not before raising her eyebrow at the mirror. In her look, I saw concern that she was leaving a young woman with an unpredictable man in an unchaperoned situation. I resolved to explain to her later that I had no such designs on Christine. I spoke from my vantage point behind the mirror. I watched your audition, mademoiselle. Her face twisted sourly, but she didn't raise her eyes from her slippers.
I missed too many notes. I should never have picked that piece. I'm lucky they didn't toss me out into the street.
I'm sure she expected me to disagree and offer her empty reassurance. I didn't oblige. She spoke the truth, after all. I am going to teach you to sing like the stars. When you and I have finished, every opera house on the continent will seek to hire you. She finally looked up from the slipper she was fiddling with, and found the room around her empty.
Wait, where are you, monsieur?
Her head swiveled from side to side as she sought the source of my voice. I projected my voice so it came from the main door. I'm all around you, mademoiselle. I bounced my voice so it sounded like it was coming from under the dressing table. I could be anywhere. One final switch to make it sound as if I stood inside the empty wardrobe. At any time. She rose and stood very still in the middle of the room, arms wrapped around herself as she tried to figure out what was happening. Suspicion clouded her brow, and she spoke up.
What would I have to give you in return, monsieur?
She held her arms around herself like a shield, trying to block any sudden advances I might be liable to make. I do this for your father. He gave me hope when I sorely needed it, and now I find I have expertise that could help his daughter. That is all. The price has already been paid. I require nothing from you but your honest effort to improve. To my surprise, my reassurance caused silent tears to slip down her face. I stood speechless behind the mirror, unsure why she was crying or what I could say to make it better. Long minutes passed before her crying fit showed signs of drawing to a close. What is wrong, Christine? I asked, as gently as I could. She gave a long sigh, and eventually said,
My father is dead, monsieur. He died 11 years ago. I have been an orphan ever since.
She sighed once more, but said only,
I still miss him more than I can say, monsieur.
Eventually she shook herself and sat up a little straighter.
How did you know him, may I ask?
She asked curiously. I paused, unprepared for her question. I certainly didn't want to reveal to her that I was the caged circus freak she had seen that day in her childhood. Perhaps it was vanity, but I wanted her to think of me as normal for as long as possible, which was why I hid my masked self behind the mirror instead of standing before her. This also meant I would need to monitor my conversation for casual slip-ups. I could not let anything slip that might reveal to her that I did not look right. "He was something of a musical mentor to me," I finally said. She smiled sadly, and a final tear slid down her cheek.
"To me too, monsieur. Even still, it seems."
She shook herself, and the ghosts of her past faded from her face.
"What shall we do to begin then, monsieur? And what am I to call you?"
Christine and I spent a lot of time over the next few months closeted in her dressing room. I always scrupulously maintained my distance from her, throwing my voice to all the corners of the room so she could not figure out where I was actually hiding. I took the extra paranoid step of constructing a thick wall that I moved into place behind the mirror when I was not there, so that if she took to tapping on walls, it would not ring hollow behind the mirror. I required her to be present for lessons before and after every performance. She complied for a while, then began to yawn a few minutes into every session. Finally, I stopped what I was saying one night and inquired sarcastically, "Am I keeping you from your beauty sleep, mademoiselle?" She could barely repress another yawn as she said,
"Oh, maestro, I am so tired. We sang for 2 hours before the show, and then I danced all the way through. I feel like I could fall asleep here where I stand."
She sank down onto the stool at the dressing table and dropped her head into her hands. I sighed, realizing that she could not keep up the manic pace of work that I followed when I set myself to master something. A plan glimmered in the back of my mind, a plan that would free her to work exclusively with me. But I paused, frowning, as I remembered she needed her dancer's income to survive. I did not feel quite so philanthropic as to support her every need financially while I gave her singing lessons. And her prickly attitude concerning our relationship might make it so she wouldn't even accept such help if I offered. I sent her home to sleep and trudged downward to my own bed, musing on the problem the whole time. The next day, I left her a note in the dressing room. "Take the evening off, mademoiselle. Get some rest. We begin again tomorrow at the usual time. Don't be late." I left it unsigned. I knew she would know who had written it. I felt silly signing it Maestro, as she had taken to calling me. That night, there was a public gathering in the foyer of the opera after the show. I circled through the passageways around the foyer, keeping out of sight, but peering out every few meters at the glittering assemblage on the other side of the wall. I was just about to leave and go back down to my chambers when a lone form across the room attracted my attention. It was Christine. She was standing with a glass in her hand, looking across the room at two people. One I recognized as Carlotta, the leading soprano of the opera company. But Christine's attention seemed fixed on the man Carlotta was flirting with. Curious, I retraced my steps to an opening where I could look more closely at the man. He was about Christine's age, and his suit and his upright posture somehow seemed to mark him as a nautical man. I sniffed to myself, thinking of my horrible experiences on the water. If this man wanted to voluntarily sail the open seas, he was more than welcome to, in my opinion. He did not seem to notice Christine staring at him. I had no idea why she was so fascinated with him, but dismissed him from my thoughts. I descended to my chambers, mildly irritated that Christine was not spending her evening resting as I had instructed. I would make sure to work her especially hard tomorrow to make her regret her evening's folly. Christine made no complaint the next day as we worked, though I could tell from the droop of her shoulders that she was still tired. I didn't mention having seen her at the fete the previous evening. She was a grown woman, after all, and had made her choice. I hadn't forbidden her to go, and wouldn't have done so if I could have. I looked at her more closely as we worked on a lost love aria I had set her. Her voice seemed to suddenly have the genuine tremor in it that denoted real emotion. When she finished, I congratulated her. She had made me feel that I had lost a lover by the power of her voice. That was the very essence of opera. I resolutely pushed away the memory of Miriam that rose to the surface of my mind. I had work to do. By and large, I was pleased with the progress my pupil was making. Her notes no longer wavered when she concentrated on them properly. We picked apart every one of her melismatic phrases, the ones with quick notes that each need their individual moment to shine, and put them back together. She could now toss them off as easily as breathing. They were a delight to hear. I had her modify the position of her neck a little bit, then modify her stance a little bit. Then I couldn't think of anything more to correct. I deluged her with repertoire, all hand-copied from the music library. She learned each piece, and we discussed how it should be performed. I moved a little spinet into place behind the mirror so I could accompany her while she sang. My plan for how I would launch her singing career began to come clearer in my mind. I had her learn the leading role for each of the operas that the Opera House was producing this season. We spent lots of time working on those roles until I was satisfied that her ability rivaled Carlotta's. Christine would stand ready to step into the role at a moment's notice, should Carlotta need to be replaced. I made Antoinette aware of my plans for Christine's debut. She would need to stand up and insist that Christine be given the chance to sing at that fateful moment when Carlotta backed out. I could not rely on Christine to stand up for herself, as I was sure she would dissolve into a bundle of nerves at that precise moment. I had watched as Antoinette stood up for her girls, time after time, asserting and manipulating until the things they needed came to pass. I knew she would not back down until she accomplished her task. For example, she had successfully convinced Lefebvre to ban girls under 15 from the Salon de Danse. The Salon de Danse is a room behind the stage of the Palais Garnier, where patrons are invited to mingle with the ballerinas while they warm up. In actuality, the patrons come to choose the most limber girl and vie for her attention, with a view to enticing her out for dinner and into bed after that. Antoinette instituted an age limit for her girls to enter the salon. I knew she kept a blacklist of patrons who she suspected had dishonored her girls, and would have had them banned from the opera if she could, but Lefebvre had flatly refused to go this far. Christine perfected the roles she needed to learn in order to be ready for her chance to come. The day came when I didn't think I'd have enough for us to do during our daily lesson time together. I planned to review the trouble spots in each work that she was holding in readiness, but I knew that that would not take the whole time. Before getting into my boat and leaving my chamber, I seized a sheaf of papers off my piano and tucked them under my arm. They were songs that I had written down some months ago, shortly after I had heard Christine audition. I got to the dressing room early, as I always did, and flipped through the songs in the bundle I held. As each song replayed itself afresh in my mind, I realized that they seemed to have been waiting for Christine to develop the ability to sing them. I looked forward to hearing her try them for me today. I entered the dressing room through the mirror, laid the pages neatly on the dressing table, and left again. Christine entered shortly afterward and found the pages. I insisted she wait until we had run through her other pieces, to ensure that she was not letting her technique lapse. Then, I finally let her flip through the pages I had brought today. She looked at each one, humming notes and waving her hand to keep a steady beat. She seemed particularly captivated by one. I could see it in her hand over her shoulder. I had titled it, Angelus Musicae. She stood and began to sing this piece. I listened to her pour my song forth from her golden throat. She finished the song, and she gave a long sigh, caressing the page tenderly with a finger.
Oh, Maestro, did you write this? It's divine.
That was the moment that I fell head over heels in love with Christine Daae.